Water effects such as rivers and ponds are some of the most common terrain types in Battletech. And today we're going to go through my process of building such a effect. Hello everyone, my name is Daniel with Hexcrafting and I want to thank you for joining me today. This is going to be an interesting video here. You can see a couple of test pours that I've done here as an example. We're going to be working with resin today, and you can see the kind of effect that I'm looking for and some of the problems that I've encountered that I will help try and warn you away from. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in to the episode. So we're going to be discussing two primary types of water effects tiles. The first one is going to be the tiles that are wholly contiguous, so that the entire water effect is contained within one modular tile. Here's an example where I've got several levels worth of water where it's pouring down. This one I've got some problems with, but this was just a test piece that I wanted to verify a few things. I poured way too much resin in and it poured over the edges. But you can see the general effect that we're looking for. In this situation, all of the edges are going to be surrounded by some kind of land, such as grassland in our normal tabletop example. And then internally we've got several different hexes which we will be marking out. Also ignore the paint, I'm changing that for later tiles. Now when I'm making wholly contiguous water tiles, I like to go ahead and mark the outline of where I'm going to be putting the water effect. So in this case I've got a 3 tile, and I'm just going to draw a sort of squigglier line around the outside to indicate the borders of this little small lake or whatever it is. In this case, I'm going to make sure and leave a little bit on the outside of each side there, and just draw it like this. This is going to be sort of our guiding line for later when we're going to carve this out. We're going to hog this out. And I'll just frequently mark something across it just to remind me what I'm removing. Now for the other type of water effect, this is going to be rivers or streams that connect. And I want to make the edges on each of the sides where it enters and exits to be consistent. So as such, we're going to go ahead and pull out our calipers and we're going to do a little bit of measuring. I've decided that since we've got a 26 millimeter length on the edges, I'm going to come in 3 millimeters on the side, leaving me with a 20 millimeter lip at the very edge of it, and 3 millimeters worth of edge. I should say edge. 3 millimeters from where we're going to cut in to where we're going to end up having the water start. So I'm just going to make a quick mark here. Zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about here. Just going to poke it into the side there, like so, just for my purpose. And like so. That's all I'm going to do for that. Now later on, it's probably easier to make a template of some sort. You can take a hex and then draw the sides out on it. But this way we have a place to start. This should give us basically 20 millimeters. Yep, that looks good. Now with our marker, we're going to go ahead and start by marking the edge. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and set these back to back and just mark them like this so we have this looking correct. This should be plenty sufficient for our purposes like so. And I'm just going to go ahead and draw wherever this is going to go. I'm going to have this make a 60-degree turn here. And the only thing that matters for connecting is going to be this endpoint, which you can see me measuring off camera slightly here. With them back to back, we'll go ahead and mark the edges and just finish drawing in the borders, and that's going to be our tile. We're going to have water on 2 hexes where it is curving. I'll just mark that for hogging out later, and then we're going to have another section which is going to be blank. It could be anything. And then over here, we're going to do sort of the same thing. We're just going to mark the edges where it's going to enter and exit. And I've already marked it on the other side, so I'll just draw it here real quick. And you can see we'll have a sort of couple of tiles that'll connect like a river or stream in this regard. This is probably going to be the most common type of tile that you want to make usually. Now, I've pulled out a bigger tile here, and one thing that I do find useful when making these larger tiles is to make sure that if I'm going to have a deeper set of hexes, that I have marked them internally as a reminder. So I can just visually think to myself when I'm painting this later, that needs to be a darker color. Be aware, however, that I've had more problems out of the large tiles than others due to not necessarily getting the resin pour correct. I will still admit I do not have that much experience in pouring resin, but there it is. Here's the tiles we're going to be working with. Now, we're going to be doing two types of general methods of hogging out the material. I'll show you here where I'm just making a quick mark as a general gauge of how deep I plan on these particular pours going. It's not very deep. We're only removing a few millimeters deep worth of material. But the easiest way that I've found to do this is through the use of hot implements. The soldering iron is the one that I'm going to use commonly. Let me go ahead and show you what I've got. So this is a very inexpensive soldering iron. It's got an adjustable temperature. I just set it at something high, basically. And it has a tip that is angled. And you can see when it's on and it's hot, it will simply melt through this foam really, really easily. Now, that being said, when melting foam, this makes an incredible smell and a lot of smoke, which is almost certainly not good for you. So wear a respirator if you're going to be doing this. You're going to also need some paper towels to wipe off the tip of the soldering iron, as it will quickly gum up with various stuff. So let's go ahead and show you how this works. So I start with the pointy side, and we go in to at the edge. I'm going to use that sort of like a knife, basically. And we're going to go and stab it in, and we're going to sweep it through, just sort of melting the foam as it goes through. I start off typically by going around the edges and melting sort of the perimeter. The direction you pull this and how hot it is will determine how much foam it gets melted when you go through a single pass. Let's go ahead and finish this up real quick. All right, now, once you have done this, the next step is to go through and clear out what's left in the middle. So I'm going to just go through with the sort of scooping motion, where it's just like before, but we're going for mass removals. So straight in and scoop, and straight in, and just sort of burn through and scoop. You can see all of the smoke that's coming off. So make sure that you are wearing a respirator, something, because this stuff is almost certainly carcinogenic or something. Once it's built up, grab your paper towel and just make sure to wipe it off. That melted plastic is hot. It is sticky, so be careful. And then we're going to go through, and I'm going to try and keep to the edges of the hex to a degree. It's not always successful, but I will try. Also, the bottom parts are going to be a lot stiffer than the top, because after the foam is melted, it gets really rigid. All right, I'm going to go ahead and quickly melt the rest of this and show you the finished product. Okay, so we are done hogging out this particular tile. I will caution you, be aware that there is all of these jagged edges in the center. Either now or later, go ahead and run something like a piece of paper towel or something through it. Just wipe out all of the little burnt bits and edges that you can, and look through it and see if there's anything that you did not hog out properly, things that are still sticking up. All right, let's go ahead and go to the other method. Now, I'm jumping around a bit here. You see in the background where I went ahead and sealed some tiles. We're going to do that in a moment here. But I wanted to show you this first. This is what I call the hot spoon method of hogging out. And this literally takes a hot spoon. I've got a stainless steel spoon here, which I've coated in some plastic dip to give me some protection from heat. And I'm going to be using a kitchen torch, which is a butane torch to get this extremely, extremely hot. Now, this is dangerous, so if you're at all concerned about this, there are other ways to do this. But to give you an idea, you can see the blue flame. I am literally just going to hit the end of the spoon there until it gets extremely, extremely hot. You can see some of the foam that got stuck there all sort of melting away. If you're going to sacrifice a spoon for this, be aware, don't ever use it again for eating, of course. And you'll start to see the spoon change temperature here. At the very tip of it is went sort of a orangish. Yep. So I'm going to turn off that and grab that. So just to literally show you what I mean, you just stick it in, you scoop away. This makes a whole lot more smoke than the other method. And it's going to take some practice to get used to this, but it very quickly hogs away a lot of content. If you have a lot of, spoon that away there. If you have a lot of stuff to dig through, this or something similar is going to be a lot quicker than going through and using a soldering iron. Let me go ahead and dig through all this real quick with you here and show you the finished result. So there you have it. The result of this is a lot. Well, if you're not careful, you can actually cut through it really easy and get a lot thinner. But the ridges, I think, look a lot better when you're doing the wide scoops than if you're doing everything with the soldering iron. That being said, I think this is also probably a lot more dangerous because we're working with live fire. So I extremely caution you, be aware of this. All right, let's go to the next step, which after this has been hogged out, and we have to go through and seal the tiles. So we've got our tiles that have been hogged out, and I'm going to go ahead and take a bit of paper towel and just run off the inside here. I'm not too worried about if I get any kind of fibers and stuff, but I want to make sure I brush out any of the extraneous burnt sections that I can, and a paper towel will do the job decently well, especially if it's the one you've already got a bunch of stuff on. This way you can get extra use out of it before you throw it away. After you've done this, we're going to go ahead and pull out an old friend. That's right, it's back to the modeling paste. So all we're going to do for this is we're literally going to go through and glob a whole bunch of it over the inside. I'll show you this on camera here. I'm just using my fingers and my glove here. This is going to help seal off any internal areas for when we do a pour. It'll help hold it in, hold the resin in just in case there's sections that we've missed. We're going to do further sealing with the normal painting step. But this also helps even out the appearance of it there, where you've got all the different sections that look kind of burnt in with a hot pokey thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do this with you on camera real quick for these tiles. And then we're going to go to the next step, which is painting. All right, let's get started. All right, so I've already started painting these, but I wanted to bring you in on the process here. I'm using some very, very simple paints. First off, we went ahead and covered the entire thing in your typical black Mod Podge mix. We're going to black bomb it. Now we're going to go ahead and use some blue craft paints. I use blue, the color of it, to denote the water depth. So I've marked out, for instance, here in the center, I'm going to be using some cheap paints. These are from Michaels. Like the left one is a Mediterranean blue, and the other one is a some other kind of blue there. But it's a blue and a darker blue for 2 levels of water. So I plan on having the center area of this be a darker blue and the outer areas be a lighter blue being level 1. So I am simply, in this case, just globbing this on to cover this in a great deal here. I try and pick out the edges of the hexes, as you can see here, and this is something I'm still working out a effective way to do this on. We're ultimately going to be painting the edges of the hexes in with a black marker to indicate hex lines, but for everything else, I'm just going to glob on this paint completely. Now, with that done, I may end up doing a second coat on there. I'm just going to take some of this other blue paint. We're just going to squirt it instead right in the center, and we're just going to paint this along these 2 hexes, again trying to make sure we're not going over the edge. Not very good camera control here, but you kind of get the idea here. Trying to be as careful as I can when painting these here. I may in future tiles go to a different color of blue here than this one. I'm not worried about the gloss factor. This is going to be covered up by really glossy, well, resin. So it actually makes it look better here. And a lot of this will dry pastel looking, but will look a lot better, again, under the resin. But I'm not certain about the color of the blue. Your mileage may vary. The important thing is consistency. The other thing you can do is you can mark down the level of the water. Just put like a 1 or a 2 if you need something to indicate more than level 1 depth. So, all right, after we've done this, the next part is going to be the interesting part. This is going to be the resin pour. So, I've already poured a few of the tiles up here, and I wanted to show you something to be aware of. Order of operations. If you do like I did on a few of these tiles here, you're going to see that the resin can get a number of places. So, let's go ahead and take a look at one of these here real quick. So, you see where, yeah, let's start with the one on the left. On the left here, on the right, I've poured the resin on both of these, but I flocked the left tile first. And the problem is when you've applied flocking, the resin will seep in through capillary action and soak into this, giving you a glossy, probably nigh indestructible, but a glossy base. It looks kind of like it's wet grass or what have you. It's very hard, but it's really difficult to get that gloss away from it and that wet look away from it. Same thing over here. You can see that since it didn't seep down into the crevices when I went ahead and did up the hill tile here, that it stuck with just the top section. And you can see inside where I've also painted these lines or drew them in, whatever your preference is for that. This is probably the better way to do this, where you apply the flocking afterwards, and when you go that direction, you don't have to worry about the resin soaking in. Now, you're also going to see here that we've got the straight through tile as well here, and it's sort of the same problem, but to keep the resin dammed back in, I use a little bit of just basic painter's tape. You can see actually the resin, I've made it a little bit of a blue color. I'll show you that when we get to that in a moment here, if we can get it to focus. I'm not worried about the black paint peeling away. I'm going to repaint that at a later point. But you can see that this actually works pretty effectively at keeping the resin back for our tiles. So I think painter's tape is going to be something important to have. But you can see it actually came out pretty well for these sections here. And after I paint them up, that should look pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and get to mixing some resin. So today I'm going to be using Art and Glow casting and coating epoxy resin. This is a 2-part resin, which is you add equal parts by volume, not weight. So it's actually really easy to mix together. Just don't do what I've done and mess up the ratios. I'll get to that here after all this is done. It is also probably better, in my opinion, at this point, after doing this a bit, to pour a little too little than too much. And you'll see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go ahead and make about 100 milliliters of resin. I'm doing this by sight. This is not the best way to do this. I should be using disposable cups, but I didn't have any available, so we're going to be doing it this way. This is a silicone mixing thing here. So I'm going to fill up one part of this to the 50 milliliter mark, and then the other part to the 50 milliliter mark. Now, with 100 milliliters of this, I'm going to add a little bit of coloring. This is Tamiya Clear Blue paint, acrylic paint. This is alcohol based, and it actually mixes in this pretty well. You don't need a whole lot. We're just going for a very light tinting to the clear. Should help mix everything together here. And then you have to stir this a lot. Specifically in this case, we're looking at about 3 to 4 minutes of gentle stirring before we do any kind of pouring. And I make a mistake here in this case. This part's the resin itself is not a problem. I do stir it long enough, but you shouldn't be making it right to the rim like that. I honestly don't think. Make it in smaller batches. But this way, I went ahead. I added a few more drops of this in, and mixed it with the popsicle stick. Mix. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump to when we get to pouring. Now we're going to start with the river tile here, and I'm just going to pull out the little stick here and let it dribble some of the resin into there. This ends up being the best of the 3 tiles here that I'm showing on camera with doing the resin pour here. This is actually a silicone mat underneath. It came with a really cheap resin kit. The silicone mat being the best thing out of this. And then now we're going to go ahead and pour this in. It is very possible to pour far too much, so be careful. And when in doubt, pour too little. And then make sure that you sort of slosh it around so it's going to get in all the different crevices. It's not very uncommon to have different parts of the tile have little recesses and such where you've cut it through and you've got gouges. So it's also really good to have this setting on a level surface. If you do have this tilting in any way, it is going to cause the resin to go that direction, and it can cause it to overflow, depending on a number of things. So I'm going to set this aside. We're going to go ahead and grab the next tile where we're going to do a pour. This the next tile is one that I have got some push pins on the bottom for feet for holding. This is going to prove to be a disaster. So I start off by pouring a bunch of this in here. And the problem with the larger ones is if you're not slow, you can have a issue where you pour too much. And even when you don't pour too much, if it's not perfectly level, because there's a much larger amount of resin in there, it is much more likely that it is going to pour out. So I'm sort of sloshing this around here in this case. You can start to see some of the bubbles there. We'll get to that later. And yeah, sort of pushing in. There's a bit of resin I pushed over the side. That's going to cause a problem. I should wipe that up immediately. You can start seeing where I've put far too much resin in here. That's a problem. And it's also going to end up tipping over and just spilling out all over the place. So don't do what I do. If you're going to pour these larger amounts, pour much less in each of these. And maybe do multiple layers as opposed to just one solidified pour. So if I'm looking at it real quick just to see if I've got high enough initially. That's my thought. But since I'm starting to pour it over the edges, it's starting to get all of that messed up, and yeah. This tile is ultimately going to be a loss. But let's go ahead and push this tile aside here. You can actually watch it probably flip over in a little while, a little bit here. And I'm just going to pour the rest of this in here. This one has a similar issue. This one turns out better. But let's go ahead and get this poured in like so. And my initial thoughts for this one are that I didn't have enough resin. What I should have done is to leave everything be and then let it dry and then do some additional resin after everything is dried. What I decided to do with this case is to make up a smaller batch of resin. And when I do this, I don't think I get the ratio correct because it ends up still being sticky. And I'll show you that here in a minute. Assuming that everything is correct, you sit there and you let this dry. That being said, there's one thing you need to do first and maybe periodically. Art and Glow has a working time, it says, of about 45 minutes, but you can generally get longer, but it's really liquid for at least for the first 45 minutes. It's about a day or so for it to harden fully. And you can see here where I started to have a problem where the not being balanced correctly was causing it to tip over and pour out resin. Now we need to get rid of the bubbles that you're seeing in the lower right there, and we need to do this for all of them technically here. And the easiest way to get rid of bubbles that are coming to the surface is going to be with the use of some heat. So a lot of people like to do things like use matches or a lighter or a barbecue grill lighter with a long stick. I found the easiest way for me to do this is going to be with the use of a hot air gun. Specifically, I use something really inexpensive from Harbor Freight. So what you do is you take the hot air gun, put it on its lowest setting, set about 6 to 8 inches above the tile, and you're going to blow hot air onto the top of the resin. So I bumped the camera a few times here. But as I go through, if you look on the lower right, you can see as the bubbles will simply pop just like that. Now, if you want to be on the safe side, you want to go through this a couple of different times because in these tiles, I have gotten a few bubbles that were persistent and sort of drifted to the edges. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to care, but it is something to be aware of, especially if you're going to be doing a larger pour and you want this to be something that you don't have a problem with. So let's go ahead and jump to the end, and I want to show you the final result. So at this point, we have had plenty of time for the... don't ignore the stuff on the left. That'll be for the next video here. We've had plenty of time for the resin to cure and harden, and the small tile actually came out pretty well. So if you look at it, it is not to the exact edge of the surface. This is probably ideal in the end. Let's go ahead and peel off this paper tape, and you can see we've got a nice subtle blue color to the tiles. Yeah, there we go. To the resin. You can see what I mean about the bubbles there on the left. I didn't catch that, so that's perfectly fine. I don't care really. This one is hard, and it actually turned out decently well, except for the fact that there is well, actually, sorry, this is the one that is not perfectly hardened there. It's at the right level after a bunch of the resin poured off, but you see it's all sticky. This is the one where I added extra resin to it, and I do not think the resin has cured properly. So as a result, this tile is going in the garbage. This tile, in my opinion, is not going to be usable. The last tile is also not going to be usable. This is the one where you had resin pour out everywhere. So as you see at the bottom, I didn't have it supported properly. Don't make my mistake in that regard. So the weight of the resin was causing it to tip over, and the resin just poured out on the edge. I also ended up getting a few bubbles. It did harden properly. That's not an issue. And I might otherwise try and save it, except for the fact I also had something that flew into it, and I had to gouge that out, and I didn't like the resultant there of that. So Yeah, that's the thing. Protect your once you get this, you probably want to put a covering over it or keep it out of the area. Make sure it's properly supported, and but otherwise, at least this part came out good. I think it was the extra resin that I poured on the other one, but you can definitely see where one side is definitely a lot fuller than the other. But because of all the problems, it's also going in the trash. So there you have it, my process for making water tiles for Battletech. Again, you want to remember the order of operations unless you want a wet look to the flocking. Make sure and do that after the fact. Remember that you've got different hexes, and if you want them to stand out, draw your intersecting lines before you put in the resin. And then if you're going to be doing the edges like so, where you have connecting pieces, make sure and remember to mark out how much you want in and keep that consistent among all of your tiles. So that's pretty much it, though. I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. This is a learning process, and the more you work with resin, the more you will get used to it, but don't be surprised if you lose some tiles in the process. So next time, we should be doing something else. You may have noticed earlier in the video, but we'll pick that up on the next episode. Thank you all for joining me. As always, from Hexcrafting, you have a great day.